My name is Margaret Hale, and at 62 years old, I never imagined my biggest humiliation would come from the very people I'd once helped. I've always thought of myself as ordinary in all the right ways. I live in a small, two-bedroom house on the edge of town, painted a soft blue that the sun fades a little more each summer. My rose bushes out front are trimmed in even rows. My pantry is labeled. My bills are paid on time, every time. For most of my life, numbers were my work and my comfort. I was an accountant for 35 years. I liked the certainty of columns that had to balance, the way a missing dollar was never a mystery forever. If you were patient and methodical, the truth would surface. After my husband, Robert, died 9 years ago, it was the same habit with paperwork that kept me from drowning in grief. I organized our joint accounts. I tracked every insurance form, every medical bill, every small pension deposit. It was how I made sense of a world that no longer did. I retired at 60, not because I had to, but because I could. Carefully planned contributions, modest living, no wild spending. My idea of a splurge was buying the nicer brand of coffee or replacing my old recliner with one that didn't squeak when I sat down. Transparency, integrity, and restraint, that's what I lived by. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Which is why, when the inheritance came, I treated it like I had treated everything else in my life. Carefully, thoughtfully, and with documentation. It wasn't a fortune. My parents weren't wealthy. They were disciplined. When they passed, within 3 years of one another, they left behind a paid-off little house and a lifetime of savings that had grown quietly in mutual funds and savings accounts. After taxes and fees, the amount to be distributed among the family was a little over $280,000. I was the executor, the responsible one, the organized daughter. The one everyone trusted with the grown-up stuff. I didn't ask for that role, but I accepted it because I loved my parents and wanted their wishes respected. My siblings had passed before my parents, so the money was to be split among the grandchildren and me, what my parents had specified in their will. Every cent was tracked. Every transaction documented. I made sure of it. My niece, Emily, was one of those grandchildren. I remember the day I drove to the bank with her, the sunlight pouring in through the windshield. She was in her late 20s then, anxious and hopeful, hands twisting in her lap as we waited. "Aunt Margaret," she'd said, this means so much. You have no idea. We're really going to turn things around." She had just married Daniel, a man who struck me as charming in the way used car salesmen are charming. Too quick with smiles, too rehearsed with compliments. Still, I wanted to believe in them. I had watched Emily grow up. I'd held her in my arms when she was a baby. When she wanted to go to college but didn't have enough for tuition, it was me who quietly contributed, never asking to be repaid, just telling her to make something good out of it. The inheritance distribution was straightforward. I kept copies of the will, the bank transfers, the signed acknowledgments. I emailed everyone a breakdown. I printed hard copies and mailed them to the few relatives who still preferred paper. I even created a summary sheet color-coded, so no one could say they didn't understand. For a while, everything was quiet. And then, one Sunday after church, the whispers started. It began subtly. A woman I'd known for years, Carol, avoided my eyes in the fellowship hall, even as she smiled too tightly and squeezed my shoulder. "Rough time in the family, I hear," she murmured. I frowned. "What sort of rough time?" "Oh, I shouldn't say," she backpedaled. "It's not my place." 2 days later at the grocery store, I overheard my own name in the next aisle. Margaret Inheritance spent it all. I froze, my hand hovering over a can of soup. "Poor Emily," another voice replied. "They thought she'd get more, you know. But apparently Margaret, well, she burned through it. Shame at her age, being so reckless." I stood there, staring at the shelves, my vision blurring. Reckless? At my age? That evening, I received a call from an old friend from Bible study. "Margaret, I'm only asking because I care," she said cautiously. "Is everything all right? Financially?" "Yes," I replied slowly. "Why?" "Oh," she sighed. "I just heard some things, you know how talk goes. That there was some disagreement over your parents' inheritance. That you might have used more than your share." That was the first time I felt it, a cold, nauseating wave of humiliation tightening in my chest. More than my share? I didn't sleep that night. I pulled out my files, the thick accordion folder with neat tabs. Will, bank statements, transfers, emails. I went through each section again, even though I already knew what I'd find. The math was correct. The will's instructions were followed word for word. Every beneficiary, from my distant cousin in Ohio to Emily, had received precisely what my parents intended. So where was this coming from? The answer came sooner than I expected. The following Sunday, I approached Emily and Daniel in the church courtyard. They were standing in a small cluster of relatives, some of whom looked at me with something like discomfort or judgment. "Emily," I said gently, waiting until she met my eyes. "Could we talk for a moment?" Her smile faltered just enough for me to see it. "Sure, Aunt Margaret." We stepped a few feet away, out of earshot of most people, though I felt several gazes follow us. "I've been hearing some strange things," I began, keeping my tone soft. "Rumors. People saying I wasted the inheritance. That I took more than I should have. I wanted to ask you directly, do you know anything about that?" For a heartbeat, her face registered guilt. Then it smoothed over. "People talk, Aunt Margaret," she said lightly. "You know how this town is. They probably just misunderstood something." "But misunderstanding what?" I asked. "The numbers are clear. You received 50,000. You signed for it. Everyone did. I've shared the breakdown before." She glanced around, shifting on her feet. "I don't remember the exact amount. And Daniel, well, he thought there might have been more, considering the size of your parents' house, their savings, your father's pension. He just speculated, I guess. Maybe people ran with that. You know how it is." She sounded casual, but there was a tightness around her mouth, a defensive edge in her eyes. "So you and Daniel have been talking about it with people?" I pressed, still keeping my voice low, controlled. She crossed her arms, suddenly defiant. "We're allowed to talk about our feelings, aren't we? We just thought things could have been handled differently. But it's done now, so why stir things up?" I swallowed down the sting. "Because my name is being dragged into conversations I never agreed to. Because people I've known for 30 years are looking at me like I'm a thief." Her jaw clenched. "No one said thief." "Oh, they've said worse," I replied quietly. She sighed and looked away. "Look, people exaggerate. I can't control what everyone says. Maybe if you hadn't made everything so secretive, there wouldn't be questions." "Secretive?" I repeated, genuinely stunned. "Emily, you were in my living room when I went over the numbers with you. I sent you the documents." She shrugged as if bored. "Like I said, people talk. And that was it. No apology. No willingness to correct the narrative. Just a wall of vague dismissals and passive blame." As I walked back to my car, the betrayal settled deeper. This was the girl whose tuition I'd helped pay. The girl I'd let sleep on my couch when she fought with her mother as a teenager. The girl I baked brownies with on holidays when she said she felt more at home in my kitchen than anywhere else. Now, she was willing to let the town believe I had stolen from her. The days that followed felt like moving through fog. At the post office, the clerk who once chatted about her grandchildren handed me my receipts with a strained politeness. At the hair salon, 2 women lowered their voices when I walked in, their conversation abruptly changing. Selfish. Wasteful. Unfair. The words floated around me, unspoken but present in every diverted glance. I spent my evenings alone at the dining table, my papers spread out in front of me like a shield. I reviewed every record, not because I doubted myself, but because I needed something solid to hold on to in the chaos of gossip. The facts were my anchor. I had done nothing wrong. I knew that. I could prove it. The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it, something steadier began to form. A quiet, stubborn resilience. I would not scream. I would not plead. I would not stoop to their level and throw accusations around without evidence. If there was one thing I still trusted, it was that eventually, the truth finds a way to the surface. So I decided, that week, that I would not retaliate, not yet. I would observe. I would document. I would be ready. On an ordinary Thursday night, rain pattering against the windows, I sat in my worn recliner with a book open in my lap, unread. The house was still, the tick-tick of the wall clock keeping a slow rhythm. My laptop sat on the side table. I reached for it almost absently, telling myself I'd distract my mind with a movie or some knitting tutorial I'd never actually follow. When I opened it, a small red bubble blinked in the corner of my screen. One new email. I clicked. The subject line stared back at me in all caps. "Urgent, we need your help." When I clicked the attachment, I felt my breath leave my chest. At first, I thought it was another rumor, another sideways accusation, another demand disguised as politeness. But as I stared at the email, sent from Emily's address at 9:47 p.m., my skin prickled with something colder than dread. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single sentence. Can you look at this for us? Below it, an attachment titled, Debt Consolidation, Urgent Review.pdf. My hand hovered over the trackpad for a moment before I opened it, bracing myself without knowing why. And then it appeared. Page 1. Total outstanding balance, $603,781.44. The numbers were bold, black, and merciless. My throat tightened. For a brief second, I wondered if it was some kind of mistake, a phishing scam, something that wasn't real. But then I saw the names. Emily Harper, formerly Emily Hale, Daniel Harper. My niece. Her husband. My pulse thudded in my ears as I scrolled. Page after page of itemized debt laid itself bare in front of me like a confession they had never intended for me to read. Personal loans, $142,000 credit lines, $89,000 unpaid taxes, $63,500 a failed restaurant venture I'd never even heard about, $210,000 high-interest bridge loans, $42,300 miscellaneous debt, medical bills, car repairs, maxed-out department store cards, $57,000. Every line item was dated, tagged, categorized. Many were months, sometimes years old. The earliest loan dated back nearly 7 years. The business investment gone wrong? 4 years ago. The unpaid taxes? From a year before they'd ever breathed a word about the inheritance. I stared at the figures until the numbers blurred. They had been drowning long before my parents died. And while they were sinking, while interest mounted, while they were signing loans they couldn't possibly repay, they told the world that I had misused money, that I had wasted an inheritance meant to save them, that I was the reason for their hardship, their struggle, their desperation. A trembling breath escaped me as understanding settled in, slow, heavy, uninvited. They hadn't misjudged me. They hadn't misunderstood. They had needed a target. Something, or rather someone, to point to while their own house quietly burned behind them. I scrolled down to the end. There was a note from the Debt Consolidation Agency, professional but urgent, stating that if immediate funds were not found, legal action, asset seizure, and wage garnishment were imminent. And then, at the very bottom, in red text, client has indicated potential assistance from a family member capable of providing lump sum payment. A family member. Capable. I closed my eyes. This email, this wasn't meant for me. Or rather, it wasn't meant for me until after they had time to soften me, guilt me, manipulate me. They had likely been forwarding this document around all evening. To banks, to loan officers, maybe even to Daniel's parents. And in their frantic rush, they'd hit the wrong name in their contacts list. My name. The careful facade they'd constructed, brick by brick, around town. It had a crack now. And through that crack, I could see the truth. They were desperate, financially reckless, and so deep in denial that they had tried to bury their shame beneath my reputation. I clicked back to the first page of the PDF and stared at the date. Generated. 6 weeks before the first rumor about me had reached the church. My mouth went dry. 6 weeks. They were already sinking when they publicly implied I'd stolen from them. Already terrified, already cornered. The rumor wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a smokescreen. A distraction. A shield to hide behind. I felt my heart tighten as a simmering ache replaced the initial shock. I had spent weeks swallowing whispers, walking through aisles of lowered voices, enduring looks that sliced without words. And they, Emily, the girl I'd loved like a daughter, had watched me suffer rather than admit they were overwhelmed and irresponsible. I rubbed my thumb slowly against the side of my hand, grounding myself the way I had during difficult tax audits or tense client meetings. The old instinct returned, the one that didn't panic, didn't react, didn't retaliate. Assess. Document. Understand the timeline. Then decide. I took a steadying breath and saved the PDF into a newly created folder on my desktop titled Harper Documentation. Then I opened a spreadsheet. The calm green and gray of the cells was strangely soothing. I began entering dates. Column A, loan dates. Column B, debt amounts. Column C, interest. Column D, notes about when rumors had started. 2 patterns emerged quickly. The first, their financial spiral was long-term, not sudden. A slow unraveling of poor decisions, unnecessary risks, and bad judgment. The second, the rumors about me had spiked at the same time several of their accounts had fallen into collections. It was a timeline that spoke for itself. I didn't know what I would do with the information yet. I didn't know if I wanted to confront them. Or wait. Or simply file it all away for my own sanity. Every part of me warred between heartbreak and restraint. But there was one thing I knew with complete clarity. I would not be manipulated. Not this time. As I saved my spreadsheet, a small shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was the quiet awareness that the truth, cold, sharp, undeniable, was no longer hidden. I closed the PDF slowly, exhaling the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Just as I placed my hands in my lap, grounding myself, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. The screen lit up with a name that made my stomach clench. Daniel Harper, Emily's husband, calling at nearly 10:30 at night. His voice, when I answered, was frantic. For the first time since the rumors began, they needed something from me. "Margaret," Daniel said, breathless, as though he'd been pacing before dialing. "Thank God you answered. We're dealing with some temporary financial issues." Temporary. The word landed like a shard of glass. I could still see the $603,781.44 figure burned into my vision. Nothing about that was temporary. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone as even as the accountants I used to train. "What kind of issues, Daniel?" He hesitated, one beat too long. "Just, cash flow." He forced a laugh that sounded as brittle as thin ice. "It's nothing dramatic. Just a rough patch." I said nothing. Silence has a way of drawing out truth, or at least exposing the holes in a lie. He continued, his voice quickening. "We were thinking, hoping maybe you could help us out. Just spot us some money. Something to hold us over. Spot us. Like borrowing sugar from a neighbor. Like this was casual. How much are you talking about?" I asked. Another pause. "Well, the exact number doesn't matter yet. But it's sizable. Nothing you couldn't handle." I blinked at the phrasing. Not could you help. Not is there any way. But nothing you couldn't handle. The entitlement in it curled my stomach. He exhaled sharply, as though frustrated I wasn't jumping in to save him. "I mean, you've always had money put away. And after the inheritance, you must still have plenty left. Even if you wasted some." My grip tightened around the phone. There it was. The line he wanted to walk. The implication that I had poor judgment, followed by the expectation that I should now bail him out. "I didn't waste anything," I said quietly. "Well," he replied, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "That's not what people say." "I know exactly what people say," I answered. "But I also know the truth." He exhaled again, impatient this time. "Look, Margaret, I'm not here to rehash the past. We need help. Right now. And you're in a position to give it." I let his words settle. Each one was a red flag unfurled in real time. "What is the money for?" I asked. "Specifically." "I told you. Cash flow issues." "That's not an answer." His tone sharpened. "It's complicated, okay?" "It must be," I replied, "if you can't explain it." He scoffed, as though I was being unreasonable. "It's debts. Bills. The business got hit with some unexpected costs." "What business?" I interrupted. "You don't have one anymore." A beat of silence. He slipped. He knew it. I knew it. "Look," he said quickly, "this isn't the time for details. We just need money now. And if you could stop being so rigid about it, that would help." Rigid. A word people use when structure and accountability inconvenience them. I inhaled slowly. "Daniel, I keep thorough records of my finances. You know that. I don't make decisions without documentation." A sudden shift in his breathing. A microscopic crack in his composure. "Documentation," he repeated, voice quieter. "Yes," I said. "Of everything." A long silence stretched between us. I imagined him swallowing hard, recalibrating, deciding how much he could push. Then he laughed too loudly. "Well, that's great, Margaret. Very responsible of you. Really. I just meant big picture. You've always been comfortable." Comfortable. A word that means give us what we want. I stared at the darkened window, at my own faint reflection. A woman who had been humiliated, blamed, and whispered about for weeks. A woman now being asked to save the very people who'd painted her as careless. "I'll need time to think," I said at last. His frustration snapped like a twig. "We don't have time. We need it now." "I'll still need time." Another silence, this one colder. "Fine," he said. "But don't take too long. You owe Emily at least that much." A quiet anger pulsed through me. Not explosive, but controlled, like water rising behind a dam. "I don't owe anyone money," I said. "Good night, Daniel." He muttered something I didn't catch before hanging up. The moment the line went dead, the house seemed impossibly still. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't even pounding. Instead, there was a focused calm settling into me, like dust settling after a jar is shaken. There was more to this. Much more. The lies weren't isolated. The rumors weren't accidental. And the timing wasn't coincidence. I set the phone down and walked to the bookshelf where a small wooden box sat tucked behind old photo albums. Inside were letters, receipts, notes, small remnants of the last 20 years. And among them, memories I'd pushed aside. The time I loaned Emily $800 for textbooks she told everyone her mother paid for. The time I covered their overdraft fees by quietly depositing money into their joint account. The time Daniel borrowed $2,000 from me to repair his car, only to upgrade his stereo system the same week. The birthday check I wrote Emily that she cashed immediately rather than waiting, leaving me juggling small bills until payday. Even back then, the boundaries had been soft. Too soft. I excused it. I told myself they were young, struggling, trying. But looking at those memories with new eyes, I saw a pattern, not of need but of reliance. Expectation. Entitlement. And now desperation. I sat again at the dining table, my documents spread before me like a map I hadn't finished reading. The $600,000 debt wasn't their only secret. I could feel it, an instinct honed by years of tracing financial inconsistencies. If I was going to understand the full picture, I needed to be patient, strategic, thorough. I would not confront them prematurely. I would not let emotions dictate my next move. Not when the stakes were rising by the hour. I opened my laptop again, intending to review the timeline I'd built earlier. Another red bubble blinked in the corner of the screen. One new email. Same sender. Same frantic timestamp pattern. No subject line. A single attachment titled, Plan. Family Support Options.xlsx. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open. It was a spreadsheet, a detailed breakdown of how much they intended to borrow from me, and notes on how they never planned to repay it. I stared at the screen, the blood roaring in my ears, as the first row came into focus. Option A. Convince Margaret it's her responsibility. Appeal to guilt. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. The trap had been set, and now I could finally see it. They were counting on me being too ashamed to speak. The spreadsheet made that painfully clear. I sat at my dining table, the glow of the laptop casting pale light across my hands, as I scrolled through row after row of their words. Private notes they never meant for me to see. Row 4. Margaret always caves when she feels responsible. Daniel. Row 6. She hates conflict. If we push a little, she won't argue. Emily. Row 9. Remind her of all she's done for us before. She needs to feel guilty. Emily. Row 12, the one that made my breath pause mid-chest. She'll be too embarrassed to confront the rumors. Use that. Daniel. Too embarrassed. Too ashamed. Too soft. I felt a peculiar stillness settle over me. Not rage. Not sorrow. Something colder, steadier, older. I had spent my career unraveling other people's financial knots, learning that panic clouded judgment while quiet analysis illuminated truth. And now, the truth was illuminating them. Their plan wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. Their notes mocked my character, picked at traits they'd mistaken for weakness. Compassion, restraint, privacy. They were confident I would never defend myself publicly, that the humiliation would keep me silent, malleable, and pliable. They were wrong. Scrolling further, I found the section labeled Approaches. Option A, guilt. Bring up family loyalty. Option B, public pressure. Everyone thinks she mishandled the inheritance anyway. Option C, stress urgency. Claim we're facing legal trouble. She won't want the family to look bad. Option D, use church community. Make it seem like helping us is the Christian thing. Option E, if she hesitates, imply she's selfish. Below, in a merged cell spanning 2 columns, a final note. Goal, $150,000 minimum. Prefer $200,000. A lump rose in my throat, not because of the amount, but because of the confidence behind it. They believed I was predictable. Someone whose silence could be exploited. Someone who would sacrifice her dignity in the name of keeping the peace. They forgot that peace built on lies isn't peace at all. I closed the spreadsheet slowly, my fingers steady despite the tremor in my stomach. Then I printed everything, the debt statement, the spreadsheet, the emails, the timestamps. Each page slipped out of the printer with a soft mechanical hum, forming a stark white stack of facts and betrayal. I gathered them into tidy piles, labeling each with sticky notes as though preparing files for an audit. Pile 1, Rumor Timeline Pile 2, Loan and Debt Evidence Pile 3, Manipulation Plan Pile 4, Inheritance Documentation, Original, Pile 5, Communication Logs. The familiarity of the process grounded me. I'd always believed clarity wasn't something that arrived. It was something you created, piece by piece, page by page, truth by truth. Next, I pulled out the inheritance folder from my filing cabinet. I wanted to be absolutely certain, down to the last cent, that there had never been a misstep on my part. That even in the face of slander, my integrity remained intact. I reread every page. The will, the distribution chart, the emails I had sent, the signed receipts acknowledging the funds, the notarized documents. Everything was correct, proper, transparent, exactly as my parents had specified. Not only were the accusations untrue, they were impossible. I sat back, exhaling slowly. The sorrow of betrayal had begun to give way to something steadier, ethical determination. A spine I had always possessed but rarely needed to use. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth, unvarnished, unembellished, undeniable. And I wanted protection. Not just from their schemes, but from the corrosion of silence. Silence, I realized now, had given them space to spin their version of the story. Silence had been their shield. It would no longer be mine. I opened my calendar and clicked on a quiet weekday afternoon. Then I typed, meeting, Pastor Glenn plus trusted witnesses. Pastor Glenn had known me for 30 years. He'd baptized my husband, sat beside me through grief, and never once judged me without fact. And there were 2 family members, my cousin Lydia and my brother's son Michael, who had always shown fairness and steadiness even in family storms. I wrote each of them a brief, calm message. I would like to meet privately to clarify a misunderstanding regarding the inheritance and current rumors. There are documents I would appreciate sharing with you. Would you be available this week? I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I simply invited transparency. Within an hour, all 3 responded with variations of the same sentiment. Yes, whatever you need. It was only after scheduling the meeting that I allowed myself to sit down on the couch, the stack of printed evidence beside me like a reminder of how far things had spiraled. As I stared at the papers, I realized something else. This wasn't the first time Emily and Daniel had twisted reality for convenience. Small lies, ones I had dismissed years ago, now flickered back with clarity. Emily claiming she never received the birthday check I mailed, though the bank had confirmed otherwise. Daniel swearing he repaid a small loan in cash a few months back, though I knew he never had. The whispers years ago that I had refused to help them with a down payment, when they had never asked me in the first place. They had been reshaping narratives for years. I had simply never connected the threads. Until now. And now, the threads formed a rope strong enough to pull the truth out of hiding. I folded my hands, feeling the quiet resolve settle deeper. This meeting wouldn't be dramatic. Wouldn't be emotional. It would be factual, steady, and entirely free of embellishment. I would present exactly what happened, nothing more, nothing less. Because facts, once spoken aloud, have a way of dismantling even the most persistent rumors. I stood, gathering the papers into a clean folder, and placed it beside my handbag near the door, ready for the meeting scheduled for the next afternoon. Just as I reached to turn off the lamp, my phone buzzed on the table. A text message. From a number I recognized, my cousin Sharon. The preview line read, "We heard you stole from the family." I stared at the screen, my heartbeat steady but cold. The rumors were spreading faster than I realized. And tomorrow, I would finally begin to unravel them. I walked into that room determined to speak the truth without raising my voice. The church's small conference room was quiet when I arrived. Sunlight filtering through frosted windows, dust motes drifting in the still air. Pastor Glenn stood near the far wall, hands folded gently in front of him, his expression warm but weary. He'd known for days something was wrong. He simply hadn't yet known the shape of it. Lydia and Michael were already seated at the round table. Lydia gave me a soft nod, her way of saying I'm here, whatever this is. Michael, my late brother's son, looked worried, his knee bouncing beneath the table. "Thank you all for coming," I said, setting the thick folder of documents on the table with deliberate care. I know this wasn't easy to arrange on short notice. Pastor Glenn gestured toward the chair beside him. "We're here to help however we can, Margaret." I sat, smoothing the folded edge of my blazer. My breath came slow, steady. I had spent the entire night preparing these documents, not to confront, not to punish, but to protect. The lies had grown too loud to ignore. I want to clarify some misunderstandings, I began. About the inheritance, and about some rumors that have been circulating. Lydia leaned forward slightly. We've heard some of them. They didn't sound like you. That small sentence warmed something inside me. Proof that not everyone was willing to assume the worst. Before I explain anything verbally, I said, opening the folder, I want to show you the facts. I placed the first stack of papers at the center of the table, the original inheritance summary, the official will, the notarized distribution records, the signed acknowledgments from every beneficiary, including Emily. I followed every instruction my parents laid out in their will, I said, down to the last cent. No one received more or less than they were intended to. Michael scanned the pages, brow furrowing. This is exactly what you told us years ago. Why are people saying otherwise? I gave him a tired, knowing look. Because someone has been telling them otherwise. The second stack included printouts of text messages and emails. Rumors repeated, accusations implied, all originating from one source. Lydia's lips tightened as she read. These are bold lies, she murmured. Not even hints. These are direct statements from Emily. Pastor Glenn placed a gentle hand on the paper, his eyes full of quiet grief. I wish she had come to me, he said softly. Or to anyone. Conflict grows in shadows, Margaret. I'm sorry it got to this point. It's not your fault, I said. I should have spoken sooner. I let the rumors settle because I thought they would fade on their own. That was a mistake. They all exchanged somber looks. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the soft rustle of pages. Then I lifted the third stack. The room stilled. This, I said, is where things began to make sense. I spread out the pages. The email with the debt statement, the spreadsheet labeled family support options, the notes mocking my soft heart, the plan to use guilt, public pressure, and rumor to manipulate me into giving them money. Michael pushed his chair back slightly, stunned. They sent these to you? Accidentally, I replied. Twice. Lydia pressed a hand to her mouth. My God. Pastor Glenn closed his eyes for a moment as though absorbing a physical blow. When he opened them, they held a sadness deeper than disappointment, something like mourning. Margaret, he said gently, you've been carrying this alone? I needed to be sure, I answered simply. I needed to understand their motives before responding. I never wanted to embarrass anyone. That is not why we're here. I just need the truth acknowledged. Clearly and calmly. He nodded, compassion etched in his face. Understanding the truth is the first step. The next is addressing it with the people who caused this. I agree. He exhaled. Would you be open to mediation? I nodded. As long as the discussion stays factual. He smiled faintly. Knowing you, I have no doubts about that. A few minutes later, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Hurried, heavy, uneven. Emily entered first, her shoulders high and stiff, her face pale. Daniel followed, jaw set, annoyance already flickering in his eyes as though the meeting itself was an inconvenience. What is all this? Emily asked sharply, looking from face to face. Why did you drag us here? Pastor Glenn's tone remained gentle. We're here to resolve a misunderstanding. Together. Daniel crossed his arms. We don't have time for this. I looked at him steadily. Then you may leave. His eyes flickered. He'd expected pleading, not boundaries. He stayed. I placed the first document in front of them. This is the inheritance distribution. Emily rolled her eyes. We've seen it before. It didn't add up. It adds up perfectly, I said. You signed acknowledgement of it. She blinked, confused for a moment. I slid her signed document across the table. Her own handwriting stared back at her. Daniel snatched it. This proves nothing. I'm not here to prove anything, I replied. I'm here to present the truth. I laid out the timeline of rumors, dates, statements, names, carefully documented. Then the emails. Then the spreadsheet labeled plan. Emily's face drained of color as she read the notes. Her own words, her own digital trail staring back at her without mercy. Her hand trembled. Aunt Margaret, I didn't mean. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. This is taken out of context. Pastor Glenn's voice cut through the tension like a soft blade. Daniel, this is evidence, not interpretation. It's manipulation, he snapped. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Then you should have said that, I replied quietly. Not this. I tapped the spreadsheet, the section detailing how to pressure me, guilt me, coerce me. Emily suddenly covered her face, shoulders shaking. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. I didn't know what to do. Daniel glared, the anger rising in him as the room shifted, sympathy draining away from their side and pooling quietly in mine. Lydia stood, her voice trembling with controlled fury. How could you two lie like this? How could you let her be humiliated? Michael shook his head. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate. Daniel's jaw clenched as though he might explode, but Pastor Glenn raised a hand, steadying the atmosphere. We are here to find truth, he said softly. Not to escalate, but the truth is now visible. Painful, yes, but clear. Emily sobbed harder. Daniel's face hardened further. The room felt tight, charged, like a storm waiting for lightning. And still I kept my voice level. I am not here to accuse either of you, I said. I am here to show you the reality of the situation. And there is one final document we need to address. I reached into the folder and slid out the last printed sheet. Thick paper. Black ink. 600,000 reasons for the lies they had told. I placed the $600,000 debt statement on the table. The room went silent. Silence fell so heavy it felt like the air disappeared. The debt statement lay in the center of the table like a detonated truth, its numbers dark and merciless. $600,000 owed. 600,000 reasons for their desperation. 600,000 explanations for the whispers, the accusations, the sudden spike in hostility toward me. Emily stared at the page as if willing the ink to rearrange itself. Daniel's jaw moved in a clench-release rhythm, his eyes darting between the pastor, the relatives, and me. Then suddenly, "This is a lie," Emily blurted out. "It's not ours. Someone sent it to you by mistake." Her voice shook, but the denial leapt out of her like a reflex she'd used too often. Daniel seized on her words. "Exactly. It's taken completely out of context. You don't know what you're looking at, Margaret." I folded my hands on the table, steady and unbothered. "I know exactly what I'm looking at. The emails came from your account, Emily. Twice. The statement contains your names, addresses, and the last 4 digits of your social security numbers." Daniel's face reddened, his chest rising sharply. "Anyone can fake a PDF. I have the original email headers," I said calmly. "Full timestamps, metadata, IP addresses, routing information. I've been an accountant for decades, Daniel. I know how to authenticate documents." The room stayed silent for a moment before Pastor Glenn leaned forward, his voice heavy with sadness. "Why did you lie?" he asked gently. "Why spread rumors about Margaret? Why make people believe she mishandled the inheritance?" Emily swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Daniel, who glared at her in warning. But her voice cracked anyway. "We thought, if people believed she spent the money, she'd feel guilty," she whispered. "Like she owed us." My breath caught, not in shock, but in the quiet ache of confirmation. The truth I had suspected was now spoken aloud. Daniel threw his hands up. "We were in trouble, all right? We still are. You all act like you've never made mistakes, never been desperate. We needed help. You needed money," Lydia said sharply. "And instead of asking honestly, you chose to ruin her reputation." Michael shook his head, disgust tightening his features. "That's not desperation. That's manipulation." Emily's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Aunt Margaret, we didn't know what else to do. Everything's falling apart. The business, the loans, we're drowning. We thought, if you felt responsible, you'd want to help." She looked at me then, her eyes softening, pleading. "We never meant to hurt you." I breathed slowly, feeling the weight of the moment rest on my shoulders like a mantle I hadn't asked for, but one I was strong enough to bear. "I'm going to speak," I said quietly. Everyone fell silent. I looked at Emily and Daniel, not with anger, but with a calm firmness that made their eyes drop toward the table. "You've hurt me deeply. Not with the debt. Not with your mistakes. But with the lies you told about me. The whispers. The rumors. The way you twisted my character into something unrecognizable. You knew the truth. You had the documents. You signed them. And still, you allowed people to believe I was careless and selfish." Emily cried harder, her shoulders shaking. Daniel stared at the table, chin jutting forward in a silent defiance that had nowhere left to go. "I am not angry," I said, "but I am disappointed beyond words. I would have helped you find resources. I would have guided you. But I cannot and will not be manipulated." Pastor Glenn nodded, sorrow etched into his expression. "Thank you, Margaret. That was gracious." I turned to Emily. "You said everything is falling apart." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes, I'm sorry for that, I said gently. But I cannot give you money. Not a loan. Not a gift. Not a bailout. It wouldn't help you. You need something more sustainable than my savings. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. We don't need your lectures. We need money. That language, I replied softly, is exactly why you won't receive any. His nostrils flared. I continued. What I can do is recommend debt counselors, financial advisors, and reputable agencies who negotiate on behalf of people in your situation. But this, I tapped the documents, is not something I can fix. Emily's hands trembled. We're going to lose everything. I know. My voice softened. And I hope you seek real help. But this ends today. I straightened the stack of papers and met their eyes with unwavering clarity. No more lies. No more rumors. No more manipulation. Emily nodded weakly, tears spilling anew. Daniel pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs screeching against the floor. This is ridiculous, he muttered. We're wasting our time. He stormed toward the door without looking back. Emily hesitated, torn, her eyes flicking between me and her husband. She whispered, I'm sorry, barely audible, before following him out the door. The room remained still for several long seconds. Lydia wiped her eyes. I don't know how you stayed so calm. Someone had to, I said softly. Michael exhaled shakily. You didn't just protect yourself, Aunt Margaret. You protected this whole family from more damage. Pastor Glenn closed the folder gently, his expression one of grief and reluctant acceptance. Truth always comes at a cost, he said. But it's better than letting lies take root. I gathered my papers, thanked them for their time, and walked out into the cool afternoon air. The sun felt different, not warm, exactly, but clarifying, like light falling on something long hidden. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady, resolved, ready to rebuild the quiet credibility that had been chipped away. But the peace didn't last. 2 days later, just as I was watering the rose bushes outside my front door, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox, thick, formal, addressed in block print. Inside was a letter from an attorney representing Emily and Daniel. They were threatening to sue me. If they wanted a legal battle, they were about to discover I kept every record. The envelope sat on my kitchen table like a misplaced threat. I read the letter twice, slowly. The allegation was vague but inflammatory. Misappropriation of family inheritance funds. Words chosen to sound damning without offering a single specific detail. It was a scare tactic, nothing more. But scare tactics only work on the unprepared. And I was not unprepared. The next morning, I called the attorney recommended by a colleague from my accounting days, a man named Paul Whitaker. Soft-spoken, detail-oriented, with the kind of patience only decades of litigation can carve into a person. When I arrived at his office, he greeted me with a firm handshake and an expression that conveyed both concern and quiet confidence. Ms. Hale, he said as I set 2 heavy folders onto his conference table. You brought documents? I brought everything, I replied. I opened the first folder, revealing neatly tabbed sections. Inheritance, rumors, emails, debt statement, SBRHET communications, meeting summary. Paul examined a few pages, nodding slowly. Originals, he asked. Authenticated, timelines reconstructed, metadata intact. He let out a low whistle. Most people walk in with half a screenshot and a memory. You've brought enough documentation for a forensic audit. I was an accountant for 35 years, I said. I learned early that paper remembers what people forget. He smiled. Or try to deny. For the next hour, we walked through the evidence. Paul asked clarifying questions, requested copies of certain pages, and took notes in a quiet shorthand. When we reached the spreadsheet where Emily and Daniel outlined how to pressure me into giving them money, he pushed his glasses up his nose and stared at the page a long time. This, he said finally, is proof of intent. Manipulation. Coercion. You have nothing to fear. I nodded, though fear wasn't the emotion lingering in me. It was exhaustion, an old, dull ache from too many weeks of humiliation. Can you respond to their attorney? I asked. Of course. He gathered several documents from the inheritance and email sections. I'll send a formal letter requesting they provide evidence supporting their claim. He paused, his expression softening. They won't have any. And they know it. The letter went out the next afternoon. Firm, concise, unambiguous. Provide proof. Specify dates. Identify transactions. Produce evidence. Days passed with no response, at least not through their lawyer. Instead, Emily and Daniel turned to social media. Subtle posts at first. Some people talk about family values but don't live them. We're tired of being taken advantage of. Then bolder ones. Funny how people hide behind lawyers when they know they're guilty. Truth will come out. Friends commented with sympathy, others with confusion, some with skepticism. I watched quietly, observed, documented each post. Paul had advised, say nothing publicly unless absolutely necessary. But after 3 days, he called me. They're escalating. You need one statement, he said. Singular. Calm. Factual. So I wrote, all claims are false and documentation has been provided to legal counsel. No defensiveness. No details. No counterattacks. Just truth. And the effect was immediate. People began asking questions, ones Emily and Daniel couldn't answer. What documentation? What evidence do you have? Why didn't you say anything before? Why involve lawyers if it's a misunderstanding? The narrative, built on weeks of rumor and insinuation, began to crack under the weight of unanswered questions. Then came the private messages. A former church acquaintance wrote, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have believed what I heard. Another said, I always knew something didn't add up. A third, if you ever need a witness, I'll speak up. One message came from a woman I'd grown distant from over the years. We were wrong to judge you. Truly. I'm so sorry, Margaret. I read each one quietly and responded with the same sentence. Thank you for reaching out. No bitterness. No gloating. Just acknowledgement. Truth was doing its work. 1 week later, Paul received an email from their attorney. A request to discuss informal resolution. Paul called me. They're trying to negotiate. I shook my head before he even finished the sentence. No informal agreements. He smiled. I figured you'd say that. Anything not official, I said, leaves room for them to twist the story later. I won't participate in anything undocumented. Paul's voice warmed with approval. Sound judgment. I'll decline on your behalf. 3 days passed. 4. 6. Silence. Finally, on the 10th day, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, thin, cream-colored, printed with the same blocky lettering as before. I opened it on my porch, the afternoon wind tugging gently at the flap. Inside was a single-page letter from their attorney. After further review, our clients withdraw their complaint. No apology. No explanation. Just surrender. I exhaled slowly. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Relief. A quiet kind of relief that settled into my ribs and finally let me unclench. I carried the letter inside, added it to the final tab in my folder, closed matters, and made myself a cup of tea, chamomile with honey. The legal threat had ended. But the story had not. Because that evening, as I sat on my sofa with the television playing softly in the background, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Short. Frayed around the edges. Almost trembling in its simplicity. Can we talk? I'm ready to tell you the truth. I didn't meet her to hear excuses. I met her to finally understand. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, a quiet place tucked between a used bookstore and an insurance office. Morning light filtered through the wide front windows, softening the edges of the worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs. It smelled of roasted coffee beans and a hint of cinnamon, not a place for confrontation, but for truth spoken gently. I chose a corner booth, a seat with a view of the door. Emily entered 5 minutes later. She didn't look like the confident young woman who had once spoken so freely, so indignantly, on social media. She didn't look like the niece who had confronted me with sharp eyes and dismissive phrases in the church courtyard. She looked small, hollow, exhausted. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, strands escaping around her temples. Her clothes hung slightly, as though she'd lost weight too quickly. Even her steps seemed hesitant, each one placed carefully, like she wasn't sure she had the right to walk toward me. Aunt Margaret, she said softly, stopping at the table. I gestured for her to sit. She slid into the booth across from me, folding her hands together tightly. She didn't meet my eyes at first. Instead, she looked down at the table, at the chipped paint of the sugar caddy, at anything other than my face. I know you don't owe me this. Her voice cracked on the last word. I'm here, I replied calmly. Say what you need to say. She drew in a shaky breath, then released it like she'd been holding it for years. It all started much earlier than you think, she whispered. The business. Daniel's restaurant? It collapsed 3 years ago. He kept telling people it was slow or seasonal. But really it was failing. Every month was worse than the last. I said nothing, just listened. We had borrowed money, she continued. So much money. From banks, from credit cards, from those predatory lenders that promise fast approval and hide the real numbers in the fine print. She rubbed her forehead. It snowballed. 1 month behind became 2. Then 6. Then we couldn't even keep up with minimums. Her voice cracked into a whisper. And we were ashamed. So ashamed. My chest tightened, not with sympathy alone, but with the deep ache of understanding the depth of their fear. Why didn't you tell anyone? I asked softly. She shook her head, tears forming. Because we didn't want to be those people. The ones who fail. The ones who can't manage their lives. She let out a trembling sigh. Daniel said if we told the truth, everyone would judge us. So instead, we just hid everything. We kept hoping something would turn around. She wiped her eyes, frustrated. It didn't. Her fingers twisted together. When the inheritance came, it felt like a sign. Like maybe we'd have just enough to stop the bleeding. But then we saw the numbers, what you fairly gave us, and realized it wouldn't fix anything. Not even close. I nodded slowly. So you blamed me. She flinched as if struck. We didn't start out intending to. It just slipped out one day. A comment to a friend. Something like, we thought the inheritance would be larger. And she misunderstood and said, oh, did Margaret keep some? She swallowed hard. And instead of correcting her, I let her believe it. The confession landed softly, but its weight was enormous. I'm not proud of that, she whispered. I knew it was wrong. But when she believed it, when other people believed it, I saw how easy it was. How it made us feel like maybe our problems weren't all our fault. Like we had something external to point to. So you kept feeding it, I said evenly. Tears spilled over her lashes. Yes. I inhaled slowly, letting the truth settle. Letting it integrate itself into the timeline I already understood. She continued. And then Daniel realized something. The more isolated you were, the easier it would be to ask you for money. If people thought you mishandled the inheritance, if they thought you were guilty of something, you'd want to fix your reputation. And helping us would look like atonement. Atonement for something I didn't do, I said. I know, she cried. I know. It was awful. And every time I tried to stop it, Daniel would say it was too late, that the rumors were already out there, so we might as well use them. And I let him. She covered her face. I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed. I watched her quietly, steadily. My heart hurt, but not with rage. Those wounds had already begun to cool, replaced by something quieter. You caused me a great deal of pain, I said. Humiliation. Isolation. You allowed people to believe I was dishonest. That I mishandled money. That I betrayed our family. I know, she sobbed. But I also see the fear behind your choices. And the shame. And the desperation. She looked up at me, eyes red and trembling. I can offer you emotional support, I said. Guidance. Resources. And the chance to start repairing trust. Her breath hitched. But money? No, I said firmly but gently. I will not provide money. Not now. Not ever. Not when it enables the same cycle of choices. She nodded slowly, tearfully. I understand. And trust, I continued, is not something that returns because you apologize. It rebuilds through action, through honesty, through accountability. She lowered her head. I want to make this right. Then begin with truth, I said. With everyone you lied to. She nodded again, smaller but more certain. For a moment, we simply breathed. The air between us felt raw, but honest. Bruised, but moving toward healing. I am sorry, Aunt Margaret, she whispered one more time. I accept your apology, I said. And I hope you find a better path forward. We parted without an embrace. It wasn't time for that yet. Maybe it never would be. But as I stepped outside, the cool morning air brushed my cheeks, and I realized something. I felt lighter. Sad, yes, but unburdened. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and just as I sat down, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I recognized from church. You should tell your story. People need to hear what really happened. I realized the truth wasn't just mine to hold. It was mine to reclaim. For weeks, I had endured whispers in grocery aisles, odd glances in church pews, quiet withdrawals from people who once knew me well. My silence had protected my dignity, but it had also allowed rumors to grow legs, arms, and a voice far louder than my own. Now that the storm had broken open, I knew I needed to put everything to rest, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. So I sat at my kitchen table one cool morning, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, and wrote a message for the community bulletin. Not a confessional, not an emotional plea for sympathy, just a calm, factual account of what had happened. I wrote, "To those who have expressed concern or confusion regarding the inheritance of my parents' estate, I would like to clarify that all distributions were executed exactly as outlined in their will. Each beneficiary received the amount specified, and all documents were notarized and acknowledged at the time. Recent rumors suggesting mismanagement or misuse of funds are untrue. Appropriate documentation has been reviewed by legal counsel and verified. This matter is now closed, and I wish everyone peace moving forward." I didn't include names. I didn't include accusations. I didn't even mention Emily or Daniel. Compassion doesn't mean excusing harm, but it also doesn't demand public humiliation. Once the message was submitted, the weight in my chest loosened. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking on my own name again, no shadows trailing behind it. The response began the same day the bulletin went out. A woman from church approached me in the parking lot, her hands clasped nervously. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. I should have asked you directly. I never meant to judge." Later that afternoon, I received 3 messages. "I should not have believed the gossip. I owe you an apology. I hope you'll accept it. You've always been fair and honest. Never doubted it." Even the clerk at the post office, the one who had grown strangely formal, leaned across the counter and whispered, "Good for you. Glad the truth came out." None of these words erased the hurt, but each one stitched back a thread of trust that had been frayed in recent months. Integrity, I realized, is quiet but durable. Rumors burn fast and bright, but truth is a slow flame that doesn't go out. As the days passed, I found myself reconnecting with people I'd withdrawn from unintentionally. I met Lydia for coffee, and we talked not just about the ordeal, but about her garden, her children, and the hobbies we once shared. Michael came by one weekend to help move old boxes from my attic, something my late husband used to do. We laughed, and the laughter felt real. Not cautious, not strained. I repaired what mattered, and I allowed the rest to fade. Meanwhile, life took its own quiet course with Emily and Daniel. They withdrew their lawsuit and then withdrew from the community. There were no announcements, no farewells. My cousin Sharon later whispered that they had moved 2 towns over, that Daniel had taken a warehouse job, and Emily was searching for part-time work. I didn't pry. I didn't follow their updates. Healing, for them, would have to begin where manipulation ended. And I had already carried enough of their burden. With my schedule no longer tangled in legal meetings or tense gatherings, I returned to the routines that grounded me, volunteering at the food pantry on Tuesday mornings, tending my rose bushes, attending Bible study, helping with financial workshops for young families. I found comfort in the rhythm of small things, the kind of peace that doesn't demand attention. And perhaps most importantly, I began practicing boundaries in a way I never had before. Boundaries, I learned, are not walls. They are doors that you choose when and how to open. When people asked me for help now, I listened with compassion but responded with clarity. I can guide you, but I cannot rescue you. I can offer advice, not money. I will help you understand your options, but the decisions must be yours. Honesty, calm confrontation, and documentation, these became not shields but tools. Ways of saying, "I see you, but I will not lose myself in your storm." One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sky grow gold and purple, I felt a sense of closure settle around me. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet understanding that I had walked through something painful, publicly painful, and emerged still myself. Still steady, still honest, still whole. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. It wasn't about vengeance or vindication. It was about remembering who I was, and refusing to let anyone rewrite that history. Before I end this story, I want to say something directly to you. Life will hand you betrayals, not all at once, but in small cuts that can feel far more personal. People you love may misunderstand you. People you trust may take advantage of your silence. And sometimes, the people you would have helped most willingly will be the ones who misuse your kindness. But boundaries, truth, and dignity are not punishments. They are protections. They are the gentle firmness that keeps you centered when others try to pull you off balance. So if you find yourself facing whispers or manipulation or quiet cruelty disguised as family loyalty, remember, you don't need to shout to reclaim your voice. You only need to speak with honesty. You only need to stand in your truth. And you only need to document the facts, confront calmly, and protect your peace, because no one else will do it for you. Every betrayal teaches us something. Every lie reveals more truth. And every moment you stand your ground, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Thank you for listening.